Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us on a morning after a lot of activity and dinners and parties and whatnot, and you all have a lot of strength to be here this morning. I hope we can keep you entertained. We're going to be talking about the impact of Taliban rule on Afghan women, Afghan culture, music, the arts, all issues associated with the agenda for the LLF. So I'm going to start with Bette Dam, who's a specialist on Afghanistan. She has written a book about looking for Mullah Umar's grave. Mullah Umar, the leader of the Taliban, was mysteriously disappeared after the defeat of the Taliban in 9/11. And she's written an amazing book of research, and which a few other people have been able to do. So Bette, let's start with, the Taliban have brought in a culture in Afghanistan, which they claim is according to the Sharia. And what actually is the reality of, what have they done to culture?
I think, thank you so much, Ahmed. From studying Mullah Omar, I think that southern Afghanistan is, with the Taliban, is actually a mixed bag where they have, and the tribal rules mixed with the Sharia, with how they perceive Islam. And I think that is how they see, and they would call it Islam, though it is actually a mixed picture. For example, the role of women and how they see the role of women in a society. That's different.
Can women be divorced? Can women get a divorce?
At the moment, no. No, I do know from the profile of Mullah Omar that when he got into power in 1994 and late 1996, that he did try, he was aware that there was so much tribalism still present in their Islamic State, and he did try to change something. For example, the heritage for women is in tribal society almost non-existent. In Islam, it is existing. And there are decrees of Mullah Omar that he wanted to change that so that women could have a heritage. Yeah. The same for what happens when there is a murder in the family. In tribal society, you pay that off by a marriage of the other side. Yeah. That Mullah Omar wanted to change too. He said that's not good. Or the care for...
Are you saying that he was quite progressive in his views?
I mean, I was a bit surprised to hear this, yeah. He didn't manage, huh? I mean, he was not strong enough to implement these things, but he did think about it, he did speak about it, and he did write decrees about it.
And what about the Afghan Taliban today? Are they following his line? Are they trying to improve the political and religious system? Or they reverted back into conservatism?
I think the Taliban right now, after they grabbed the power, are still figuring things out. I have to say. I think it's still not yet clear where they stand. We do see that after August 2001, I mean, everybody can see that we go like this in a sense of freedoms. For example, they kept the Tolo television on air. They also had women present the news without any problem, which was major for the older Taliban, because the television didn't exist before. It was. Right. And let alone a female on the television. So that was all going on for a month, and that, yeah, we see like things closing up, like Tolo News is under a lot of pressure, and of course girls' education.
Razia, when I was young, we used to go to Kabul and we used to hear concerts, which were often not allowed in Pakistan. And concerts in Dari, in Pashto, in Uzbek, in many different languages. And it was a fun city. I mean, Pakistanis used to go over and watch movies, hear the music. The cafeterias and the restaurants had music in them, people playing the sarod. What has happened to I mean, Afghan culture has obviously disappeared. Music is something that is now looked down upon and is even banned. Has Afghan culture, is it disappeared? Where has it gone?
Thank you so much for your question. First of all, I would like to say it's a great privilege to be here in Lahore, to return to Lahore. I was here previously, but this time was a very special one, and it's our great pleasure to have Ahmed Rashid as a moderator of our panel. Thank you very much. Yes, the situation, and I wrote about it in my book, Afghanistan Dispossessed, Women Culture and the Taliban. The situation is very difficult now for all professional artists and professional musicians because music performance is strictly prohibited. Afghanistan is a multinational country, and in the 34 provinces, in particular in the north of Afghanistan, so many national minorities are mixed up, and their way of preserving their cultural heritage was for centuries was crucial, important, because musicians believe that if you play your music and you play your musical instruments, your national identity would be preserved. And with this ban on music performance, many musicians are now in a terrible situation. Either they try to run away from Kabul and Afghanistan to Pakistan, by the way, or they should stop their performance completely. It's a real, challenge for them. By the way, Kabul in particular is a city where so many children and students enjoyed studying and performing, including Afghan National Institute of Music in Kabul. But now Kabul is overwhelmed with school droppers, and orphans, and people are not allowed to perform anymore.
What has happened to the musicians? Have they all fled the country?
Most of them, those who could, they certainly did. And by the way, Afghan National Music Institute from Kabul had to move now to Portugal, to Lisbon, where they're trying to survive, continuing with their repetitions, with their rehearsals, playing both Western and traditional Afghani instruments. So they try to survive.
So can you tell us about the music that you want to play?
I wanted to show you short samples of musical performance from the north of Afghanistan. I did my field work in the north of Afghanistan and made some recordings with musicians, thinking it just for my family archives or for my students to share the evidence about very rich musical culture in Afghanistan. But then when I heard that one musician passed away, another passed away, and the third one, due to their age, passed away, I understood it's a documentary, my eyewitnessing recordings of my meeting those musicians and so on. Can I please play some few samples of this film, from this film? Female gatherings were in particular very interesting, and I wanted to show you just how do they play music in female communities, please. It was the celebration of the end of Ramadan, and for this Eid celebration, they all gathered women in Mazar-e Sharif together to play some music. And you will see 3 generations of them gathering together, singing all those songs in Uzbek language, because according to some figures, about 5 million of Uzbeks living in the north of Afghanistan. And these female communities, they live such a vibrant life, you know, when they are inside, when they are not wearing burqa, you know, and not restricted in their place, yes, in their activity.
Right. What happened to Afghan poetry? I mean, the tribal, nomadic tribes of Afghanistan thrived and lived off poetry. Is that still existing? Is it in a different form? Is it become very religious?
I don't know, because I haven't been to Afghanistan for now almost a year, but also I didn't really look into the poetry. I'm really curious because actually before 9/11, when the Taliban was in power, poetry was quite a thing. Mullah Omar would go often in hiding to watch poetry sessions. And there were also poetry awards. But I don't know exactly what sort of poetry was
it was, as far as I remember, religious and militant.
Right.
About the war, glorification of the war, the martyrs, etc.
Probably, yeah. But it was not blocked. It was still quite alive. And
Tell me, you've researched Mullah Omar so conducively. I mean, what kind of personality did you find in him? And he married several times. Can you tell us more about his personal life?
Yeah, the marriages were all basically a tribal solution to a problem. So, which is a very tribal thing to do at the same time, though Mullah Omar, yeah, it's a bit confusing. It's not like one picture, I think, but yeah, he had 4 wives in the end.
All at the same time? Or?
No, over the 4 years he was in power, he married 4 times. The last time he married in 2001, yeah, a very young girl from Arghandab.
So that was just before the American attack?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think maybe what I could do is read a little bit about his family and a short piece. It also explains a little bit, I think, about how they see the role of women. Let me see where it is. I was fortunate enough to get to know Bibi, the wife of the businessman Isa from Haji Ibrahim, a very small village, through my conversations with him and his son Ahmed. She had known Mullah Omar, his wife's sister and mother, in Haji Ibrahim. These women visited Bibi in her home in Kandahar city after Omar came to power. Their lives were very different from hers. Mullah Omar was a real village mullah, living in his own little world, whereas Isa and his wife have moved on from that long ago. Bibi still well remembered the conversations she had with those women. Mullah Omar's female relatives were overawed by what for them was the big city of Kandahar. It was a real adventure. It was just 20 minutes away in a taxi, but it felt like another world to them. During their visit, they looked around in amazement. Did Bibi really have an entire house with multiple rooms and multiple stories? At meal times, they were given a fork and a spoon, a total new experience for them. In fact, they didn't use that. Instead, they would take, of course, the piece of naan and use it to scoop up the rice in a traditional fashion. The women were impressed with Bibi's iron. They wanted to know how she got it hot. They had heard of electricity, but had no idea how it worked. Bibi recalled how they stared at the light bulb glowing in the middle of the room. When Bibi asked her to turn off the light, Mullah Omar's wife flapped her veil at the bulb as if it were a candle. It was a huge contrast with their lives in Haji Ibrahim. They told, just one last part. When Omar's sister was picked up the next day by her husband, she had to lie down on the back seat so that no one would catch a glimpse of her eyes under the burqa. When I asked whether the sister had a problem with this, Bibi shook her head. On the contrary, she was proud that her husband wanted to keep his wife hidden from sight. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, it's a very different image of, it's a different image of parda than what we have.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's the women accept it. They don't try and rebel against it.
No. Actually, they see it as a sort of care.
Right. To look after the man's sense of honor and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right. So, tell us more about your students. Are they Afghan or Central Asian?
My students in Cambridge, they are mostly British, but there are some Afghan students now, some students from Turkmenistan, and these students certainly also from Iran, and these students are much more interested in the, learning about Afghanistan, because so far there is no any well-established, subject in the curriculum of universities in the UK about Afghanistan, unfortunately. Right. Yes, but female situation in particular, just continuing, your question, are in a very difficult situation. For example, one of the documents, it's called Afghanistan's Voluntary National Review 2021, before Taliban returned. So, it shows that women, youth, and the power were the three largest majorities of the country, the top priority of the government. There was a Minister of Women Affairs, there were some women's organizations. More than that, the proportion of women in managerial position was just 3.4% for the statistic, but however it had a place. And women are really in a very difficult situation because Afghani women, the total fertility rate of Afghani women is 5.3 children per woman, which is among the top 10 in the world. As a result of higher population and fertility rates, people below 20 years of age make up to 60% of the population, and on average 600,000 people enter the workforce each year searching for jobs, but women and girls are not allowed to get any jobs. So a female situation is really something very difficult because women now are hiding themselves under burqa. They're not allowed to go on their own to see the doctor, and they're certainly not allowed to apply for a job or to study. And it's very difficult for them because it restricts all their ability, to be part of the country's, life.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I think it's important indeed to mention that before the fall of Kabul, that under the Republic, there was an attempt to integrate the women in the society after 2001, mainly run by the Americans and the government in Afghanistan. I do think we have to be careful by also saying, like, then it was a sort of paradise and now it is very problematic. I think the fact that the Taliban were able to return is not for nothing. It was not going well. It was not going well. There would have been no Taliban at all. There would have been no support for the Taliban if there would have been no random killings, for example, that families were afraid to lose a member every day without being able to go to a court because it was simply too corrupt. And that pain that increased. You didn't see a lot of Taliban in the first 4 years. Everybody was hopeful. There was a lot of interest from the Taliban in the Americans. There was a surrender also in 2001. So, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity. and we could have had, maybe, I don't want to be too rosy, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the positiveness after 9/11 and how everybody wanted to work with the Americans and how they thought that the Americans, some would say in the family of Mullah Omar, we thought that the Americans had roads in New York that were paved by gold. And that country would come to Afghanistan and help us. I mean, that's like, what a luck, almost.
No, I agree with you. Absolutely. I agree with you. My own books speak of the wasted opportunities that the Americans had. The most important one was that the Taliban did try and surrender. They didn't want to continue the guerrilla war after they'd been defeated. They wanted to surrender. And the Americans wouldn't let them, and nor would the Pakistanis. They wouldn't let them surrender. They wanted to defeat them, kill them, whatever it was. And I thought that was a critical mistake, because then you would not have had the revival of the Taliban necessarily if they had been accommodated within the power structure in Kabul. And you remember the government in Kabul after 9/11 was made in Germany by the international community, and it avoided the Taliban. It made it did not accommodate the Taliban. So that was the first. And the second was the support that the Taliban got the second time round, frankly, from Pakistan, from clandestinely from the US. And this even as the Americans were going to war in Iraq and going to war in other places, they still decidedly re-supported the Taliban, giving them a new lease of life. The major positive thing, I think, by the Western presence in Afghanistan was literacy and the creation of educated women who became nurses and doctors and teachers and etc. And that was a very big and dramatic shift. And a lot of these women have now left the country, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the elite in Kabul has indeed benefited from the presence of 20 years of millions and millions and millions of dollars. At the same time, I traveled in Uruzgan, a province in the south, and in around 2012, there were 6% of the girls going to school. And the school buildings were closed.
2012?
Yeah, that's a low number. So, yeah, I think there is an elite in Kabul that has benefited from it, that almost, to my taste, was also talking a bit too much the language of the West and was not, it was a bit, the American money came in and then you had to be liberal, you had to be all the values that the Americans have, that sort of was copy-pasted in Kabul. And I think Afghanistan has a lot of values too, and has a lot of culture background that's fascinating and that should flourish. Anyhow, yeah. I think it's a very, very sad 20 years. I see within the Western community, with the governments, that there is no wish to look back. I've been in meetings, high-level meetings, where they made a statement of an opening statement saying, "We are not going to look back today." And there's American ambassadors, EU ambassadors sitting at the table, and I'm like, "Are you joking? How can you not look back at these very painful 20 years that has resulted in a painful situation in 2001 now, until now? I mean, don't you feel the pain of this country?" I find it unbelievable. So yeah, we don't have a lot of progress on that from the West. The West is now interacting with the Taliban, mostly putting up the finger and saying, we will tell you what is good and what is not good, and you should behave. And I think that's a way of diplomacy we've seen before 9/11, mainly by Washington, D.C. You can read all the cables of the Islamabad embassy, for example, how the tone was, how to look down, how to not trust the Afghans, and I see that happening again. And I'm very worried about the outcome of that. I don't think in the current setup that we are heading for something that can be less painful for Afghanistan, and it's on both sides, on the Taliban top in Kandahar and Washington, D.C.
Razia, do you have more examples of?
Yes, please. I would like to show exactly some cultural heritage which was preserved in female communities. Can you please play number 2? Yes. Thank you. You can see how women are singing all together. There are more examples. All together in Uzbek language, very old folk songs. It's interesting that the mainland Uzbekistan, they lost this kind of folk heritage, folk music heritage due to the Soviet, colonization and the pressure of Soviet ideology. But those songs are still performed in Afghanistan within female communities. And it's interesting to see that some of those songs are sung by grandmothers, mothers, and little girls, which means, the knowledge transmission is here. So it's very precious to have the chance to perform. It's very important for multinational Afghani culture to have performance flowing. But unfortunately, due to political situation, to this ban and restrictions on music performance, they are not allowed to do it anymore. We know that music transcends language, culture, and time. And just listening to those songs and performance, we understood how rich is the culture of Afghanistan. And we can only, to ask the question, what this heritage will face, in the future. Will it survive or not in such very difficult, draconian, rules of the current government?
Are weddings still being celebrated with music? What do the Taliban accept?
Taliban doesn't accept any instrumental music, unfortunately, but weddings without music are not existing, so we don't know what's going on there. Although Taliban supported the idea of mass weddings. There are on YouTube, on the website now, some evidence have they accepted, 200 couples marrying at the same time without any music. But it was kind of an example of, mass cultural, flow imposed by the Taliban, so which is absolutely against any traditional culture, Afghani traditional culture. Sung and played daf and played chankobuz, which is Juf's harp, and they sang non-stop singing. They sang for a long time, and I did my recordings for a couple of hours. All those genres most probably will disappear very soon because the population, people, in particular women, they would not be allowed to perform and they will be punished, you know, and that's why it's very important to study for us this subject, you know, and spread the knowledge. Also, women, Afghani women are famous for their craftsmanship. They are very good in carpet making and embroidery. And very often, while they're working, they keep singing. There are some songs, in particular songs, which are accompanying their, you know, craftsmanship. Can you do the next one example, please? And that's
the wedding party, and she proudly confessed that.
Oh, it's another one. Okay, leave this example. The only wedding singer, female wedding singer in north of Afghanistan, Sabzi Gul, she passed away recently. She didn't have any pupils, any students to, you know, transfer her knowledge, to teach them how to perform. Due to all these obstacles, the whole genre of female wedding singing is disappearing. And it's the reality which we face today with the reappearance of Taliban.
I record.
All right. Okay. We heard a lot about women writing poetry clandestinely. That they started a new short poems of 4 lines each, and that would circulate amongst the women in Kandahar and in other places. Did you come across this at all?
No. Sorry, no. Maybe, no, I didn't.
You didn't come across any kind of, you have a few poems in this book. You have a poem or 2, I think, in this book.
Yeah, it's basically, it's very much like, I describe a couple of scenes, but it's not that I know how if it's 4 lines or not, no.
Yeah. How were you accepted yourself in the male Taliban? I mean, you were covered, obviously. Did you dress up as a man, or
No.
Was there?
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I didn't expect to have the access that I actually got. I think as a Westerner, you are not part of the tribal system and the honor system of protecting the females or suppressing the females. It depends on how you look at it. From the Western men, I actually, the other day I had to speak to a conference, and I called my very good Afghan colleagues and friends, Ahmed and Najibullah, who play a big role here. And I said, how did you like it to work with me? And they said, actually, it was comfortable that you are a female, because our perception of a female is that they are not so much part of the war. And men, Western men, can always be spies, or can always be, or maybe wear a weapon somewhere in their bag, or have a link with the army. And I think that is an explanation that gave me access. We had extensive, long interviews of hours and hours and hours with the Taliban. I also think that there was an underrepresentation in journalism from the Taliban side. I think journalism in Afghanistan in the last 20 years has embraced the enemy of the United States as their enemy. I think journalists should reflect on that. I don't think that is journalism. Journalism I prefer to be non-emotional, non-activistic, and interviewing all sides of the story. So I had a lot of access on that front. I remember we visited one person in Kandahar, a little bit in the village, so a long drive, and we didn't know if he wanted to speak to us. And we wanted not to announce ourselves. So I drove off with Ahmed, and Ahmed walked into the Kala first. I was just waiting in the car under the burqa, and he came back with the person that I wanted to speak to. And the only thing asked, like, does she have a weapon with her? And if she doesn't, then she's welcome. He said, you don't want to know how many times Americans have tried to speak to me, because he was well informed about the Taliban. He was a good source on the Taliban. And he's like, all the time the Americans come here, they come with a big weapon on their belly. And I don't speak to people with weapons, which is understandable. And I think the Americans never adapted to that humanity, to the real interest of knowing.
They never accepted the culture. I mean, they never accepted the culture.
No, it was for them very much a
when
war.
you enter somebody's home, you don't enter it with a weapon. I mean, you put the weapon to one side.
Yeah, like Ahmed Isa, his father, was a very important businessman in Kandahar who knew a lot. And the moment the CIA came and picked him up to talk to him, they put him in the back of a car, drove him to a secret military camp, drove him 10 times circles, until he was like, he had no idea where he was. And then the Americans said, now, we want to interview you. Are you ready? And he's like, no, I want to go home.
So let me turn to the audience now. Are there, I see there are a lot of young ladies. Any questions, please? Where's the mic? Somebody got the mic?
All right. Thank you. Am I audible? All right. So my name is Inamullah Marwat. I'm actually a lecturer at Department of Political Science. Two questions I have. One is very simple. Like currently, when you look at Afghanistan, it's in a kind of a dilemma. So it has to feed public sentiments, and that is what we are having. You know, we are getting from Afghanistan, the way they have banned women education and all these things. And then they are getting this pressure from the international community as well that you need to go along with us. Question is, for how long Afghanistan, how do you see the future of Afghanistan? Where exactly it is going, and can it go along with this you know, foot in two boats? Second question is from a decolonial perspective, and that primarily goes to Ms. Bette. And that is actually, I'm not actually hitting you personally, but this is something I'm talking on the behalf of the South. Question is, can West understand this thing that, you know, we have some cultural context over here? I mean, West experimented this thing with Iraq. They came up with, under the cover of new liberal paradigm, installed democracy over there.
Yeah. Can you ask the question? Yeah.
That's the question. Question is, when you bring with such kind of, you know, oversimplified answers that, you know, the problem to your solution is democracy, you try to experiment with it in Iraq, you created a mess. You brought it here in Afghanistan, you created a mess.
Let the lady answer the question. Go ahead.
Yeah. I still believe that there is possible fruitful engagement and empathy possible between people. And that doesn't mean we always understand each other. Let's say we would meet in the place in the south. But maybe we should look at what is the goal of our conversation? Do we just have a tea? Or do we want together to see if girls' education could start preferably yesterday in Afghanistan? If that last thing is our goal, yeah, then we both need to be prepared for this conversation. And I'm afraid that there is at the moment, there's so much at stake in this conversation between the Americans predominantly and Kandahar, the Sheikh and his 5, 6 close, sorry, I'm finishing. That so much emotions and so much politicalness that it is almost not about girls' education anymore at the moment. And I find that very problematic. So I don't know if I would love you to answer now, but it's not possible. But this is, I think, if we would both come without weapons, and if we would both have a very warm feeling for the girls' education, and no parliaments that would block us, no very hysterical on both sides defending ideology, but just thinking like practically, how can we get the girls back to school?
Let me is there another question? Another question?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Khanzada Asfandiyar Khatek and I'm a classical dancer. My question is regarding the Afghan music and dance. So, first of all, the greatest similarity or the greatest population of the Afghans outside Afghanistan is in Pakistan. So, talking about Afghan National Institute of Music, wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it have been better if that had been, based in Peshawar or Quetta or Pashtun area, or even in Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan, because, all these neighboring countries have similar ethnicities, rather than losing it to Europe or to the America, to the West. Thank you.
It's a very good question, thank you very much, but unfortunately not for us, for scholars and performers to give an answer, You are right, it would be better to host it in Pakistan, this Afghan National Institute of Music, or in Uzbekistan, but it's the question which is, decided on the level of governments, unfortunately not on our level. But it's a very good idea. Thank you very much.
Do you want to add anything? Yeah, next.
I'd like to just point out, you mentioned poetry.
Sorry, where are you? I can't see you.
I'm here.
All right, okay.
Okay, so my experience while I was researching on my book in 2003 and 4, this was Afghan Women Tales of Sorrow and Hope. So each time they would narrate their story, they would talk about, they'd say like Hafiz would put it this way, or Rumi would put it this way. And there were several poems of Afghan women themselves as well. So I just wanted to say that there was a lot of, whether it was pain or happiness, and lots of experiences they had, whether it was Russians or Mujahideen or Taliban, it was always through poetry that they expressed themselves. I included some of it and of themselves, and also kept Rumi and Hafiz in it.
Do you want to answer?
Well, Afghan attitude towards the poetry, to classical poetry, is very famous for taking it very seriously. In children at school, they're all learning, classical poetry, and they know it by heart. But it's interesting that due to the time, for example, after the first Taliban left, there were some new names and new poets, even within the female communities. For example, Shafika Yarkin was the brightest representative of Uzbek poetry in Afghanistan, and her publications, her poems were widely published all over Afghanistan. So there are different names, and there are different developments, and we hope that this kind of attitude of knowing the traditional classical poetry will continue, in the future.
Well, I'm sorry, but we have to close it today. We've got another session coming up. Please do stay for the next session. And thank you very much for your patience and understanding in this session. I'd like to thank Bette Dam and Razia for taking part in this. Thank you very much indeed.